All right, everybody, welcome back. I am doing Dead Men Walking, which is great because I was going to do the Fabius Bile trilogy, and then I was like, there has to be a different book I can do first. And there is. I'm doing this one, which is fitting because the last one that I did was fighting Necrons, and this one is fighting Necrons. So we're really on that Necron train. Also, can't seem to find my way out of the past because this one, guess what? Published back in 2010. So, the Necrons are still semi robots at this point. The runtime is 10 hours long, published by Steve Lyons, and narrated by Timothy Watson. So, I actually haven't heard. I don't think he's a regular, because it's usually like Andrew Wincott or Emma Gregory or like Toby Longworth or, etc. Anyways, moving on from housekeeping to the summary. On the mining planet of Hieronymus Theta, the ruling body is hiding something. Mutants are coming up from the depths of the capital hive to the heights that they have never ventured before. There are rumors that the mining guilds have unearthed strange worked stones covered in glyphs that look like language, and there are tremors occurring in places that haven't seen geological instability in living memory. Governor Henrik has the Planetary Defense Force and the Proctors, which are basically just police, on standby, as well as discreetly responding to disturbances to try and keep a lid on things. The root of these disturbances is much darker than anyone on the planet could have imagined. It's an awakening of the tomb of the Necron Empire. Fortunately, by the will of the Emperor, a detachment of Krieg soldiers just arrived in system to rest and recuperate from a previous deployment. A fractured, demoralized, and broken people will have to serve alongside the Imperium's most perfect soldiers against one of the galaxy's oldest species. Super simple book, super simple in concept, but just the way it's written and how things come together and the roles that each of the characters actually play in this book just make it work really well. But yeah, so that's the summary, and moving on to the characters. I'm not going through all of them, like I never actually do all of them, but that's just the disclaimer that I make in most of my videos because I don't want anyone to think that I'm going through like even the red shirts. But yeah, Governor Henrik. In a previous life, the governor served in the Astra Militarum. Leaving with distinction and finding his way into politics, he is now the steward of a relatively newly settled planet that in ideal circumstances would be looking at hundreds of years of stability and prosperity as a mining planet. For all that, he is not prepared for the remorseless nature of the Necrons or the brutally pragmatic deathcore of Krieg. At his core, he is a good man whose first instinct is to think of what is best for his people. An inner pride at the title he now holds also pushes him to butt heads with the would-be saviors of the Militarum that now run roughshod over his authority. So yeah, the governor kind of threw me through like for a loop because like he's not the standard garbage nobility that we know of. Like same thing with his niece that I'm about to talk about. They're both like, as far as nobles go, really idealistic. The most shade you could probably throw at the governor is that like he's not willing to confront stuff that happens. Like he's not aggressive in his actions, and he's mostly a defensive like person. Also, he's lazy, I guess, which I don't know. Maybe it's just because modern 40K has really, not even modern, the traditional vision of nobility in the 40K universe is just so much worse than just being lazy and mildly cowardly. But everything else is like, must look after my people. They are the most important thing. It's like, well, I mean, you're like leagues ahead of other people who don't even think that the civilians are people. So, interesting. But yeah, so the next person to talk about is Erex. She's the governor's niece, which would usually make her just part of the nobility, but since Henrik lost all of his sons in the Astra Militarum, Erex is high up in succession. Which makes her truly special is her fixation on the realities of the Imperium and her progressive attitude towards like finding solutions, or the very least addressing it. She's admirable but naive, and the events of the book shape her into a much more naive person, but no less willing to help the less fortunate and fix the systemic problems the Imperium fosters. Genuinely, I think that Eric's is like the weakest part of this book, but I think it's just because she doesn't really have much of a reason for being as progressive as she is. Like, and it might be the point of her character, for that to be the case, because like she's the naive daughter of nobility, like she thinks she can make a difference, blah blah blah, and she's like only like what, 21 or something like that. So like I get it objectively, but it's a book, so I don't know, I can't help but see her characters being pretty weak, especially when kind of stacked against the other characters that have a much more, I guess, not realistic, because nothing about Warhammer is realistic, but it comes off as more grounded reasons for doing what they do. But I could also just be scarred from the Rapunzel-esque attitude that she has. But yeah, anyways, moving on to Gunther. So on paper, Gunther Sorensen is a mine overseer who goes about his life in service to the Emperor. In his head, he knows himself to be a coward, though, so given the chance to be a hero, he will inevitably run in the opposite direction. It's a fact that brings him great shame, as the unlikely object of romance of the governor's niece, though he is now having to be more than he has been before, especially because Arax is not one to play it safe, often going into the lower parts of the hive to see how the imperial citizenry really we are who we choose to be, and throughout the events of the story, mine overseer Gunther will shed his humanity and fear to become Trooper Sorensen of the PDF and also honorary member of the Death Corps of Krieg. They're not like the most cuddly of people, as anyone who knows about this universe actually understands. So they don't truly like induct him, but it's as close to the Krieg's kind of like their mentality is relatively pleasant towards this man as far as Krieg grows. Pleasant gas mask noises, I guess, when he tries to talk to them. Commissar Castellan has spent almost 30 years since he was a young man, barely out of his 30s, assigned to the Death Corps of Krieg. This long exposure to the uniquely dour people of Krieg has left him completely hollowed out. He is tired of being the only one to attempt to care for the troops under his command. Unlike other postings, when a commissar gets a command in the Krieg regiment, his usual role actually changes. So he's no longer acting as a disciplinary figure or even a motivational one. And he's definitely not a military propagandist, because they don't need that. It shifts, basically, to an intermediary between Krieg and like whoever they serve alongside, because there definitely needs to be a buffer between Krieg and whoever they're like ordered to basically fight alongside. It's also as like a restraining hand to keep the Krieg from going too far in their tactics. So like the wave-based like absolute like just battle of attrition that every single fight becomes with the Krieg, the commissars basically learn. It's not official, it's understood after they serve there for a bit, that they are like, oh well, okay, I don't have to shoot deserters because there's basically none. They do canonically in this story address the fact that there is a desertion rate, so have it on record that there are Krieg deserters, but I also want to meet what the Krieg actually qualify as a deserter in their ranks, because I don't think it's the same thing as any other regiment's understanding or definition of deserter. But yeah, in this book, it is said that there are deserters. So, it's one of the few nuggets of lore there actually is. But yeah, what was I actually saying? Oh yeah, the commissar basically changes, turning into, hey, maybe don't throw like 3,000 guys at a machine gun just to make the ammunition run dry so that we can attack the bunker even easier, It's an interesting role that they find themselves in, and it definitely, some of them aren't suited for it, and some of them are. So that leads to Commissar Mannheim, who's much more fresh than Castellan. He's new to his command with the Krieg. Their nature is a lot to get used to, and he takes many cues from Castellan. They actually sit down and have like specific dialogue about serving with the Krieg, and Castellan kind of gives him a lot of takeaways, what his experience with the Krieg has been, and what it definitely comes off as very jaded. And he also, if you don't know about the Krieg history, he talks about how the Krieg basically came to be. But if you've read the Krieg novel, which is literally called Krieg, you know exactly how they came to be and stuff like that. But back when this book was published, that history was not like widely known. Also, this regiment wasn't like the meme that it is today, like the absolute like most popular thing outside of probably Cadia and Catachan. Like they're definitely in the top 3 most well-known things about like the Militarum in Warhammer. But yeah, so Mannheim doesn't possess Castellan's level of like idealism or humanity. Instead, he is much quicker to adopt the Krieg way of dealing in numbers and percentages, even when those numbers and percentages are casualties. One thing that takes him off guard is in having to be the ambassador for Krieg to the government of Hieronymus Theta. It's basically just their off-putting nature and like bluntness that rubs people the wrong way, and that's why the commissar needs to be there to act as that buffer between the two, because pretty much the Krieg have such a level of shame that they and weight of duty that kind of arises from that 1,000-year-long break from the Imperium, that now they kind of regard anybody who's not just like 10x more faithful than them and ready and willing to serve, that they're just like shirking their duties. So they just don't treat anybody else outside of Krieg generally, unless it's probably like the Black Templars, with like any level of respect. They just kind of tell them like it is, except it's definitely being a douchebag, and they just don't see it like that because they're totally just telling it how it is, man. But yeah, anyway, moving on. So that was Mannheim. On to pretty much the last major character in the novel, which is the man himself, Colonel 186. He's the personification of what it means to be Krieg, and that's not even his actual like name or really truly his designation. It turns out that like the Krieg, if you do run into like a Krieger with a name, it's not what you think it is. It's basically just a different title, because the last Colonel 186 died in a combat action against Nurgle cultists, and this does nothing to like actually phase him, even though the command is relatively new. He used to be Major Gamma, but he is not anymore, and there is a different Major Gamma, and now he is the new Colonel 186 of the 186th Krieg, infantry division. So he's pragmatic in all things and ultimately committed to serving the Emperor in the only way that he knows how. He brings death to the enemies of mankind using any and all of the tools at his disposal. That especially means people, for who can ask for a better death than to be in the defense of the empire of man? Much of the motivations for what the Krieg truly fight for comes out through his dialogues with the other personalities in the book. So most especially it's his talks with Castellan, as they have known each other for the longest, but also with Governor Henrik. I think he's definitely the kind of spokesperson for the characterization that Krieg is given in this book. And when you compare this, like if you ever read this book and then read Krieg like directly following, it is a bit of a juxtaposition because they are just such different representations of Krieg. There's so much more of like a mystery and like horror element. I wouldn't even say horror. It's more like thriller, I guess, element to like I think they overplay in the Krieg book like just how unsettling the Krieg are. Like, yeah, they are spooky and like they are wearing gas masks and they do have like unremittingly awful tactics, but in the Krieg one, it like the way it's written makes it come off as like they're like Cthulhu entities. Like people are like genuinely like trying to get out of every single conversation with these guys throughout the entirety of the book. Like and any Cadian that like talks to them for more than like 2 seconds is like genuinely pissed. And I don't know. It almost comes off as it's just too on the nose. is what I'm trying to say. And then this book does a much better way of kind of, it's just so much more understated and ubiquitous how everybody just kind of behaves, and the composure changes and the atmosphere in the room changes. It's so much more just like, I guess, normally unsettling, rather than like, I don't know if you've ever seen Nosferatu, but the conversation when they first get to the castle, or I guess when he first gets to the castle, and then is just like practically crawling out of his chair, and there's like that weird music that starts, and it's just very horror, that's basically that, but it's every single conversation with the Krieg in the Krieg novel. And I'm like, look, I don't care how off-putting somebody is, if it's a normal level of off-putting, and it is, because it's just a dude with a gas mask, you're not having like a full-on anxiety attack just associating yourselves with these people. So yeah, anyways, moving on from the characters, we move into the lore section. Is there any? Does this book become homework? Etc., etc. I would say that there's not really lore for this one. I don't think there was trying to be lore. Interestingly enough, and this is definitely not the intention of the book, and I don't think this, like, the pariah nexus or the, after reading The Silent King, I kind of just picked up on this, but there is attention given to how people react when being around Noctilith, and that it is like a pressure on their head, and that they don't feel as lively, and that, like, the stilling has been around for longer than I guess at least I initially thought. Like, I thought the Pariah Nexus was kind of like a new direction that we're going to, and people kind of thought this would be a cool thing to do. But in reality, I guess, the stilling has been an idea since like pre-2010. So that's interesting. Like, I always knew that the Necrons could control they have like an aura of fear type of thing, which I knew from like the pariahs themselves, that could like make you feel, because like if you ever read a Caiaphas Cain book, they'll sometimes fight Necrons, and then people will just be like horrified to be anywhere near the Necrons, and it's definitely like a manufactured amount of fear, and they'll be running away. And then just because Caiaphas has, I believe his name is Yurton, the rankest attaché you could possibly have, he has this, it turns out, and this might be spoilers for the series, but the series is old at this point, so I don't care. And also, this channel is like nothing but spoilers, so I don't know what to do for you. But it turns out that Yurton has like a low-level null field around him, because he's one of the nulls that have like no souls. So Caiaphas doesn't get affected by this pariah fields. Interesting that specifically the stilling is kind of pseudo shown off in this book, but it isn't called that, because the Imperium at this point, since it's 2010, still hasn't had a lot of exposure to the Necrons, which is cool, because the Necrons come off as like actually aliens and not just like Egyptian divas. Not that I hate the Necrons, it's just I am semi-nostalgic for like the days when the Necrons were just Terminators in space, but now they're, I don't think that I would change what they are today. I think what they've become is also interesting, and also without that we wouldn't have gotten the Infinite Divine or Trazyn or Orican or the Silent King, or the different, I guess, Catan like personalities that we've gotten. So that is also pretty neat. But yeah, so as I was saying about the lore, the stilling is in there, but outside of that, it's a lot of just, it's very self-contained. It's a lot of just fighting, and it's a Militarum book. It's very classic in its roots. So those that don't know a lot about the setting, just know that 40K books don't usually stray into quite this bleak of territory. I am reminded of another book called 15 Hours by Mitchell Scanlon that has like very much the same tone. It is just as dark as this book. And it's not even dark in like an edgy way. It's just straight up depressing. So if you're not like in a good mood, I guess, I don't think that I would read this, because it's not uplifting at all. But when I say there isn't lore, I mean to say that there isn't like main narrative lore. It's not like one of the crone swords make an appearance, or you find out how Abaddon got a hold of his sword, like Dracnian from Ra. Like, the lore we do get is very Krieg related. So if you're a huge Krieg fan, then this one is for you. So Castellan, in a conversation with Commissar, relates that he saw when he visited, they fight each other on the irradiated surface of the planet's massive, like, planet-wide engagements for training purposes. So this, I'm talking about the Krieg. Like, the surface is still uninhabitable. It's still classified as a death world. That's a shock to Mannheim, but to Commissar Castellan, he's just like, yeah, that's what makes these people like what they are. So even when the Krieg are in a position to take off their gas masks and like their entire uniforms, really, in fact, they don't, even on their own planet. So they leave their gas masks on, not only as part of their uniform, but to symbolize the penance that the legacy of Krieg puts on its soldiers. The women that he sees on the planet are all pregnant. And to that last point, I will explain a bit that I think it just bears going into a little bit more. There's a rumor, or maybe more like a myth at this point, that the Krieg use synthetic birthing pods to supplement their birth rates so as to keep up their soul ties to the Imperium, which is like its troops. Because it's not an agri world, and it's definitely not a manufacturing world, and it's not anything else. It's a death world that just puts out really high quality soldiers. That is all it does. And it does this to make up for the fact that it didn't, that it rebelled against the Imperium and tried to break away from the Imperium, and then it spent like the better part of the war to reclaim Krieg took 500 years overall, and then when it eventually, the Death Corps basically arose from that conflict, and when it made a new connection back with the Imperium was like, hey, so like, you're a death world. What are you, like, glad you're back, but like we need something from you. And the Death Corps was like, we've got 20 regiments, and that's like how it initially basically opened up its diplomatic ties back with the Imperium. And this is basically how they make up for that. A similar story happens with the Vostroyan firstborn. It's where basically the nobility hand over their firstborn, and that makes up their entire like tithing to the Imperium for Vostroy. Well, in Vostroya's case, there's more because they're actually a real planet that has more going on than just people. But the firstborn situation is probably the most predominant thing on people's minds when they think of other regiments that kind of mimic Krieg in its reason for tithing troops. I've never really thought of the tithing or the synthetic birthing pods to be like a real thing, like, or even kind of plausible, though there's evidence that the Krieg just put a huge emphasis on having kids like the natural way, that adding a layer of synthetic wombs being covered up by a shady biologist or like many different adepts would be kind of unnecessary. One thing that this book also cleared up is that the Krieg are just clones of Colonel Yurton, and they're just like all hiding it behind their masks. There is a scene in the book where Castellan has to take like a group of Krieg grenadiers on a special mission to destroy some generatorums, and one of them ends up actually needing to take off his gas mask, and the description of the kid underneath just did not match the description of Colonel Yurton from the book in like Krieg, where Colonel Yurton basically was like the main character. So yeah, I think we can say myth dispelled, but there's also the other thing, which Krieg was published long after Dead Men Walking. So maybe the lore is being changed, or GW is just purposely trying to muddy the water with Krieg's like mythical reputation, similar to what they're doing with the Terminus Decree, because we know what the Terminus Decree is. It is not an order by the Emperor to like murder him the moment he tries to like stretch his legs. It is something completely different, and all of that is covered in it's a huge plot point in the Siege of Terra series. So like, and it's literally called the Terminus Decree by the custodians. Like, we know what it is, and it isn't what the Codex for the Grey Knight says. So I don't actually know I think there are things that GW does where they want to intentionally muddy the water when it comes to the lore and because they want to build mystique and kind of confusion inside the setting itself. And in doing so, maybe encourage people to like engage with the lore more. But I think all it does at this point is just kind of, yeah. Anyway, moving on, because I could talk about this for a minute. Anyway, so I don't actually have like a real idea for why, but I'll settle with reiterating that if you are a Krieg fan, or you want to be, or you just like their vibes, because gas masks noises, I guess, the meme, I would say that this book does a fantastic job at portraying them. Arguably, one of the best characterizations of the Krieg I've ever read. Yeah, so who's this for? I would say the fans of the old school grimdark Warhammer 40k setting. I wouldn't get into this if you're into sweeping like space opera stories, because you won't find anything but character-driven POVs here. This story is also all Imperial Guard centered, with not a single mention of Space Marines, so no Angels of Death. The human element plays a huge part in what makes the story, especially its ending, like actually work. Heroics don't play a major role in this narrative, and it's hard to say who this book was made for, to be honest, because part of like what people read Warhammer for is the larger than life figures that show up in the setting. Generally, I don't know, at least, I mean, I like it. I guess it is a change of pace, but at the same time, I don't know that many people in this that I know that actually read the books that are like super stoked to read a book about a bunch of people that are just like helpless in the face of what is happening to them. It's usually the opposite. They're like, they at least want a Space Marine who has a bit of agency and can fight back, etc., and isn't just like being swept up in the events of the book. But this entire book is essentially people just being swept up in the events of the book, and regardless of their actions, things just happen to them, and then they have to make the best of the situation that is happening. It is, like I said, very depressing, but you know, it is what it is. So it's a very cog in the machine experience, and that is a fundamental thing for the setting. So it's not like it's, you know, breaking from Warhammer 40k itself. It's almost playing further into that feeling of being just kind of like a mote of sand in the setting itself. But at the same time, the Primarchs are popular for a reason. So individuals like Trazyn, Uriel Ventress, Titus, Azrael, Cypher, Karn, Lucius, and of course, you know, Clone Grim and like Fulgrim and Mortarion. Like, there's a reason that these individuals are so well known, and it's just because people really like heroics, and you can't really have heroism without you know, the superhumans of the setting. So I'll settle with saying that if you like movies and media like All Quiet on the Western Front, or like Thin Red Line, or even like No Country for Old Men, then this book is probably going to be a pretty decent like suggestion for you as a reader. And I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do the review before the story section, because the story section, if I actually do it the way that it's written, is going to take a hot minute to cover. So yeah, anyway, on to the review. So heroism is a mentality that is built up consciously. Convictions to principles are necessary, though that alone will not be enough to act in the face of adversity. Hands down, my favorite characters in this my favorite character in this is Gunther. I found that his journey from being an administrator of a mine to a battle-hardened pseudo-Kriegsman had a lot of weight behind it. What you do has so much to do with like why you're actually doing it. And in the beginning, when he's initially on his journey of shedding his fear and acting much more in line with what he imagines a more courageous man acts, it is so he can at some point go and like save Erex. So Erex serves as his primary motivation for changing himself to begin with, but this motivation fades over time as he loses more and more of his old self. His character arc ties in, most likely on purpose, with one of the main themes of the book, which is the question of how far is too far when it is in the defense of a world. For Gunther's case, it's essentially how far is one individual, like how far should they lose themselves in service to a thing, or an ideal or a symbol or whatever. And then in the book's wider sense, it's definitely how far should a species go, or should humans go, I should say, in when it comes to like war and war fighting. So are the Krieg essentially justified in the way they conduct war? After all, the way that war is fought is often more important than just that the war is fought. And the Krieg set a dangerous precedent for how the Imperium can get caught up in the pragmatism that war can often ask of those that find themselves embroiled in it. So as far as Dead Men Walking is concerned, I really liked how it went from about asking these questions. One of the few gripes, actually, that I do have is with Castellan and how preachy he gets at points. Towards the end, he lays it on really thick, and it detracts from his character more than like doing anything else for him. It was better in the beginning when he reacted to things happening or showed how he was feeling in his like bearing, rather than grabbing a soapbox and regaling those he serves alongside about what human rights are. And it's just, yeah, he starts off really cool. He starts off really compelling. He starts off as kind of the jaded element, having served with the Krieg for over 30 years. I'm like, wow, you'll have a lot of unique takes on what they are and what they represent, but instead he just comes off as very like melodramatic and preachy, and it just isn't. It's not the way. The other part that I think was lacking was Eric's and Tyler's like work camp bits. It just felt like an abrupt halting of pretty much everything else that was going on in the novel. Like, there's just everything else about the novel was like well-oiled machine, and then Eric's and Tyler would show up, and I would just be like, oh my god, somebody threw a wrench in it. What is happening? So I just think it would have been a lot better if we had seen nothing of her until like the governor gets his message about someone having her family, and then used that as a jumping off point for Eric's to kind of more naturally put her into the story, because the work camp bits just felt like somebody was taking a crowbar and just being like, well, she is a character in the story, need to use her somewhere, and just like, there you go, there's Eric's. And I was just like, okay, I guess. The ending with Krieg abandoning the planet because they determined the planet was just a net loss after like denying the governor's petition to send a message for aid and an evacuation was like, because initially the Necrons reveal themselves, and it's not immediate, right? They don't just come out and be like, hey, you guys can leave, we're not going to attack. But eventually, after the shock and awe tactics that they do, and the Necrons make them basically do a majority evacuation of the city, and like a pyramid rises, and there's fighting and stuff, but it's not like open war. The Necron Cryptek shows up and is like, hey, and he's not like in person. He projects himself all around the planet, and he's like, hey, you guys can leave. We are not going to attack. Just get off our worlds. You guys are ants to us. Blah blah blah. And the Krieg are just like, no, we can take them. Look, the tomb, like, it's small comparatively, and we have reinforcements coming. We got this. And the governor is like, hey, are you sure? And like, just him asking, are you sure? The entire room of basically Kriegsmen, because he's in a room of just Kriegsmen, just turn towards him. And there's like one PDF officer going like, hey man, don't stop pushing the envelope. And he's like, I didn't push the envelope. I literally just suggested we could probably get the civilians out of here. We don't even need to evacuate you guys or the PDF or the police. And it's a funny scene. But yeah, so the fact that it just shows that the Krieg have like immense pride, and they kind of overestimated their abilities in this situation, but they also had zero compunction with just being like, all right, well, if we keep fighting, we are wasting valuable materials, as in we're throwing our lives away like uselessly, and we will not do that. So we're just going to leave. And then the planet, essentially, it ends with the planet being overrun by the Necrons, which, spoilers, but yeah. Anyway, so the other cool thing about this book is that their memeable nature is discarded in favor of a much more in-depth and serious look at their history, their conduct, their tactics, and their motivations. So after rereading this book and having Krieg relatively recently, I do think that Dead Men Walking does a better job at putting Kriegers in the field than their dedicated origin story book. Unsurprisingly, I'd say that this book is a recommend for me, although it's not a book that I come back to all that often. It's a really, really, really good read. I liked it. So I guess if I've done more than a few books on this channel, if you've found that I like those same books, then most likely if you read this, you're probably going to like it. So yeah, that pretty much ends the proper video. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. If you listen to the entire video, you are a trooper. You shouldn't have. But yeah, no, I appreciate any and all who kind of tune in and watch these videos. If you have anything that you want me to cover, let me know. I do have a request to do like a full deep dive on Grotznick, so I'm thinking about doing that next instead of another book. But if there is going to be another book next week, it is going to be Void Scarred, because I'm listening to that right now, and a Mike Brooks book is very promising. So yeah, anyways, appreciate it again. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you around.